Hey everyone, what's up today? Wazoo here with another exciting video, and today we're going to be looking at injecting JavaScript into a Spring Boot application. Yes, the day is finally here, my friends. We can finally work with some JavaScript. As usual, we're going to start things off with a really quick demo, and this is going to be the fastest demo in the history of demos. And here we are taking a look at the small snippets of JavaScript that we're going to be building today. We've got a welcome to the home page and a whole bunch of components rendering on our Spring Boot index.html page. This is going to be pretty interesting and a not usual React tutorial video. I think this is going to be a interesting one to stick around and watch. So grab some coffee, get a drink, and let's get into it. So as usual, we're going to start things off at start.spring.io. And we're just going to skim through these things because I know that everyone has been here before by now, with several of my tutorials all starting here. So we're going to be using a Maven project. We're working with Java version 2.7.1 of Spring Boot. For our project metadata, we can just replace this artifact with Spring Boot front end demo. Nice and exciting. And let's get down to packaging. We're going to stick with a jar file, and we'll be using Java 18. And for our dependencies, we're just going to be using DevTools and Spring Web. And that's it. Just these two today, my friends. So whenever you're ready, just hit the generate button, download the zip file, and extract it to wherever you like to work with your projects on your hard drive. Okay, so as you can see, I've opened up the project in IntelliJ, and it is a typical project put together by start.spring.io. So let's take a look at just starting it up and just making sure that it works. I routinely do this with every project that I put together, just to make sure that the basics and my environment is all set up correctly. So let's refresh our demo page here, and we get a friendly white label error page. So we're on the right track. So let's go ahead and stop our application. And all we're going to do to get started is we are going to create a simple controller that just gives us our home page. So let's go into source main Java com.example Spring Boot front-end demo, and let's create a new folder called controllers, and then within that let's create one called HomeController. And let's give it the annotation of controller to set up the necessary Spring Boot guts for us. And then we'll be using a get mapping of just slash. This is our home page. And so let's make a method for it. Get home. And let's just return index. I think that's all we need to get starting. So let's just, and then now in our source main resources folder, let's go ahead and in the templates folder create a new file and just call it index.html. And this will be sort of the playground Thymeleaf page that we're going to be working with. Add the regular basics of a Thymeleaf page. If you're not familiar with working with Thymeleaf, the basic idea is to make sure that you're referencing the namespace from www.thymeleaf.org, and we can assign it to a th variable in our XML namespace. And then the typical header stuff that you have on web pages. And then for a body, let's just create a div, and let's create a title tag. Welcome to the home page. And then we'll give us the P section, and let's just say something like this is a demo of Thymeleaf and front end framework injecting. And let's start with this. Back in our project creation, see, I knew I sped through it too quickly. Back through our project creation, I forgot to include the Thymeleaf dependency. So open up your pom.xml file, and let's add in the last before the end tag of dependencies, let's just add a one for Thymeleaf. And then let's reload the project, which pulls down all the necessary dependencies. Hooray! Welcome to the home page. So we've got our basic Thymeleaf page up and running, and now we can start talking all about JavaScript. So when we're talking about JavaScript in a web application, there's usually three approaches. There's usually three approaches that most projects take during the lifetime of development. So the first approach is a total separation. So think Star Trek Next Generation Enterprise D, saucer separating from the rest of the enterprise. So the saucer section would be like your client, or maybe like even a mobile app using JavaScript, talking to a backend API, which is the back half, the engine part of the enterprise. And this is usually your APIs. So this could be either your Spring Boot server, PHP, Ruby on Rails. And then the second way that most projects are written for JavaScript is you have a server shell, so like Ruby on Rails, Spring Boot, Node, things like that. And then within that container, or within that server framework, are JavaScript pages, which are actually single page application constructed within usually the index.html page of your server environment. So for example, you might have a Ruby on Rails, or in our case Java Spring Boot, and then this index.html page that we're looking at, or we just created right here, would actually be the entry point for all of your client-side JavaScript. And so you would construct your Create React app, or Angular installation, Ember, any one of those frameworks, and then make use of the single page application architecture to inject it into your main index.html file. And that's not what we're going to do today. So the third approach, which I'm going to attempt to do today, is where we just want to render components onto our page. So we want to make use of the server-side markup language, Thymeleaf in the case of Java Spring Boot, but then just layer and inject some React components onto that page. So I don't want to turn it into a single page application. I want to be able to make use of Spring Boot and Thymeleaf's routing, security features, all those kind of goodies, but just make use of JavaScript for just adding a more visual enhancement. This video then is just focused on taking some React components and dropping them onto our Thymeleaf page. So let's get back to it. Alright, so if we open I'm going to be using Windows Terminal, but you can be using whatever you want to use for your console. Just remembering that I'm on Windows, but that way I can zoom in and enhance. Okay, so let's go to our project folder. So we're now in our folder, and I have, you'll need to make sure that you've installed Node. Right now that's available at nodejs.org. I'm sure it's really straightforward downloading and installing it for your environment. To double check everything is set up and ready for us to use, you can just type in npm-v, and in our case I'm using npm 8.11.0 or node-v, and I'm using 16.16.0 at the time of this video. Node tends to get updated quite regularly, so depending when you watch this, it may already be old. Okay, so first things first, we are going to be going into the source main folder. Whoops, I keep mixing up the two. And you'll notice that we have two folders here, Java and resources. So all of our Java code, all of our Java server code is down the Java tree, and the resources contain things like our Thymeleaf templates, things like that. So right here at this point is where we're going to be creating our components. So let's create a new folder called front end, So make dir front end, and let's get in there, and then let's type in npm init --y. And what this will do is this will create a empty package.json for us, which we need in order to work with anything JavaScript side. Now let's look at, so what we're going to be using is a toolkit called Webpack, and what this will do is this will, if you haven't worked too much with JavaScript before, Webpack is what they call a bundler. And a bundler just takes your JavaScript code and converts it into a bundle, a small package that is downloaded by the browser when a user visits the page in question. So let's go ahead and type in npm install -- save dev, and let's start with React DOM, Webpack CLI, Babel loader. What else do we need? We need @babel/CLI, @babel/core, @babel/preset env, @babel preset react. Enter. And then this will take some time to put everything together. Okay, cool. Looks like everything finished. Okay, so what we're going to now do is we are going to be creating a, what do we do first? The component or the Webpack configuration? Let's do the Webpack configuration. So let's, touch doesn't work on the command prompt here, so let's just do notepad webpack.config.js right in the same root of front end. And okay, hopefully I can zoom. I don't know if I can zoom in the text here. Oh, I think I can. Great. Okay, so Webpack works with this Webpack config file, and it just sort of you're configuring what folders and what source code to take in by Webpack and convert it into the bundle that I was just talking about earlier. So let's work with const path equals require /package.json. We want to incorporate that. We want to then module exports equals, okay, how does this look in our video? This kind of looks, let's try that. Okay. Module exports, and then let's define our entry point, and we'll use a variable called source. We'll fill that out in our package.json in just a second. Then we define an output section, and this is kind of defining where our bundle is going to be built. And what we're going to do is we are going to drop it right into the resources/static folder of Spring Boot. Okay, and we're gonna call it file name package.main, and then we're gonna create a library section because we're gonna be basically creating these components as sort of a library. We're gonna be giving it the name of components, and the type we're gonna use is UMD, and I'll explain that in a second. And named define true, and then let's end this. And then what we want to do is create a module section, and this will allow us to define some rules of what kind of files to look for, like basically what file types for Webpack to watch out for. So in our case, we want to work with the files that end in the JS extension. Okay, so let's create a test. And $. Then we want to exclude node modules. And we want to use the Babel loader. Okay, dunk, dunk. And let's end this off. And then what we also want to define is an externals object, and this basically tells Webpack that we're working with React, but we don't want to include React in our bundle. So we just want to make use of our we want to bring in React on our own onto the page. Okay, so let's save it, and then if we open it back up in our browser here. Okay, so we've got everything that we just typed in, and kind of looks a little dirty, but that's all right. So let's define a source. Oops. And so what we're going to be doing is we're going to be creating everything at /source/index.js. And we're going to change our main to components.js because we've referenced it right here in the webpack config file. Let's just straighten this up a little bit. Okay, all of that is looking pretty peachy. So we're looking for main. Okay, and then what we want to do is the package.json allows you to define what they call scripts for working with the tooling that you want to make use of in your JavaScript application. So in this case, we want to create some scripts that'll help us that'll help us build our JavaScript, get it ready for working with our Thymeleaf page. So we'll be using two scripts, build and then start. And actually I'll just create another one called webpack, which just runs webpack. It's a helper to run webpack. So start is what I typically use for local development. So when I'm working on local JavaScript, I usually, if I need anything in the script file, I usually call it the start method or dev. Dev is another popular one. So what we're going to be running is webpack, and then we're going to be using a flag called --mode, and we'll be using the development mode, and this will be a watch task. So basically what's going to happen is when I run npm start, it's going to run webpack and take our JavaScript and convert it, do the magic Babel necessary stuff, and then get the bundle delivered into the resources/static folder here. And then the watch will let it just run in the background. So any changes that we want to make to our JavaScript will then get picked up automatically by Webpack, and then it'll just keep it, always the latest version will be delivered to the resources/static folder. So in the build one, which we won't be using quite yet, but let's fill it out now, we just call the same with --mode equals production. Basically we want to use the production build for the actual release of our jar file. Okay, so I think all we have to do now is create a index.js file. So in the front end folder, let's go ahead and create a new directory called source. And let's create a new file, index.js. And then let's create a components folder. And this is where we'll drop in some components. So the first component that we'll look at is just one called HelloWorld. And all this is going to do is, well, I'll show you. So let's import React from React. And let's create a function HelloWorld. And then we'll return just an h1 HelloWorld component. Basically some kind of text to make you aware that this is rendering from React. And then we're going to export default hello world. And then back in our index.js file, we want to import that hello world from components hello world. Okay, so we've got our first component written in React. Yep, it's that simple. It's like 3 lines of JavaScript. And as with the newer versions of React, we're using the function style of creating a component. So React will just take this and render the text hello world component within the h1 tag. So let's go back to our, let's see what's the easiest thing to do. So first what we'll need to do is, remember how I mentioned that we don't want Webpack to bundle any of the React libraries for us. What we're going to actually do is I'm going to show you how to use a Spring Boot Maven package called webjars in order to incorporate the React libraries that we need for our page. So we'll look back in our pom.xml file. Okay, let's open it up right here, and we'll go back in our dependencies. And after the Thymeleaf dependency that we added, we're going to be adding 2 new ones, React and React DOM. And I've included the links here. This is when you go to the Maven repository. Let's open up the React DOM one, and I'll show you what it looks like if you haven't been to the Maven repository before. So it gives you a whole bunch of statistics for whatever package that you want to look at for through Maven. So in our case, we're looking at the React DOM jar file. So someone's packaged this up into Maven for us, and it's using the latest version of React, which as of right now when recording this, it's 18.1.0. There's a bunch of other React packages that I found on Maven repository, but this seems to be the one that's regularly updated the most. So when you click on any version that you want, specific version that you want to work with, it'll then give you a nice bunch of text that you can copy to your clipboard and then drop right into your pom.xml file. So that's what we've done with this, with the React DOM and React jar files. So let's go ahead and reload them in with Maven. And then while that's working away, let's reopen our template, and I'll show you how to reference them with Thymeleaf in the index.html. So in the body of the page at the very end, what we want to do is open up a script tag, and we'll use the th source, and we'll use @ / webjars react 18.1.0 / UMD / react.production.min.js. And then let's make sure we close this off, and then we also want to incorporate our React DOM. th source equals & / webjars react DOM 18.1.0 UMD react DOM production.min.js. Oops, I keep doing that. Okay, so /script, and then what we're going to also do while we're here is we're going to bring in our JavaScript components. So equals, and then we're just going to call it components.js, because Thymeleaf will also include the path to the resources static folder. So if you remember, that's where we're gonna start dropping the JavaScript. So let's go ahead and go back to our command prompt, and then let's run in npm start. So what that should do is, you'll see there now on the command line, is it's running webpack mode equals development, and it looks like it ran into a problem. Oh right, okay, we didn't define our presets. Okay, so let's quit out of this, and within the front end folder, we're going to need to create a new file and just call it .babelrc, and it's a special Babel configuration file that we just basically define with 2 presets that we need to tell Babel about, and that is the Babel and env and Babel preset React. The only really thing to note about these is that they're needed to transpile the JavaScript you're working on into React JavaScript, for lack of a better description. You need it in your projects, but once you define it, you never really need to go back to it. Okay, so now that we've defined it, let's try running npm start again. And as you can see, we've got greens, which is a good sign. It was built successfully, and we've created the components.js file. And then if you look back in our project tree in the static folder, we now have the new component.js output. This is a really good sign. Okay, so the next test is to launch the Java Spring Boot project. Let's launch the server, and then let's go back and refresh the page. Everything still comes up properly, and let's open up the JavaScript console, and we don't see any errors. So we just see an empty thing, which is good. It means we actually have the JavaScript injecting. If you open the Elements tab on the Chrome tools, you'll see that we are indeed pulling in the React script files. You can also check the Network tab. Okay, let's refresh that. So you can check the Network tab, and it's totally hidden, but you can see here that we've got our requests for the React minified files, the React DOM, and our components are all resolving with the status of 200, which means, as you know, everything is loading up okay. Alright, so the first major step is out of the way. We've got things loading. Now what we want to do is go back into our index.html, and we want to reference that new HelloWorld component that we created. So let's go back and let's create an empty div that we're going to inject this to with React, and I'm just going to call it div with ID of HW for HelloWorld. And then within the script on that page, we need to use a th markup called inline, and then define it as JavaScript. So let's grab our component. So HelloWorld equals new components HelloWorld. And then what we're going to do is make use of React DOM, and we're going to render HelloWorld, into the ID of document get element by ID of HW. And those two lines are all we need. So let's start up the server again, and I'll go into more details once I prove that this shows up okay. And as you see here, ta-da, we've got our HelloWorld component. So I kind of breezed through a few things. Let's go back into things and talk about it. So when you're working with JavaScript libraries and packages, there's this notion of the way you interact with your JavaScript. And a lot of the all the packages boil down to several terminologies, I guess. One of them is called CommonJS, and one of them is called AMD. These are kind of the two most prevalent architectures, I guess you could call it. So CommonJS is basically it's the type of JavaScript that you would use when you're working with Node. So when you have something like I'll erase it here, but when you have something like var library equals require thing, and then library execute whatever function, blah. So that's syntax most often used for CommonJS, and then you would have like module exports equals library, maybe, if you pretend that this is a separate module. That's the most common. When you see JavaScript like that, that's probably CommonJS that you're working with. And AMD, on the other hand, is something a little bit not as common anymore, but it used to be sort of a prevalent style, especially if you're working with JavaScript frameworks like backbone.js. So AMD would have you create something like define, I don't know, Lodash, and then function. I'm just doing this from memory, so the syntax may not be quite correct. And then you would do something like so within this block, this definition block, is when you would use Lodash. So each, I don't know, each item of the array, we want to do the return the price. Totally made up. This is a total hypothetical piece of code, but the important sort of thing to recognize is the header section of a define, and then this is what you would associate with AMD, which is, I think it stands for asynchronous module definition. So you've got CommonJS asynchronous module definition, and then what we're making use of, as you might recognize from our webjar path here, is a syntax, well, not really syntax, is a structure called UMD, which is like a universal module definition, I think is the shorthand for it. And basically it's a UMD JavaScript is the kind of JavaScript that you could just drop right into your HTML page and it will run and be recognized from the browser. That's kind of the TLDR of that. So when we're using React in this way, right on the Thymeleaf page itself, then we need to make use of UMD because we're not running our project through any kind of JavaScript transpiling at this point. We just want it run by the browser. We just want the browser to load and execute the JavaScript we're giving it as is. So that was the long explanation for UMD. So we're using UMD, and we've back in our webpack.config.js, we've also defined our library as UMD because that's sort of the ultimate goal, is that we've got a bunch of components in JavaScript that we want to just drop on a page and then make use of from that page. Now you'll see here that we've specified a name for a library, which is what you have to do when you're building JavaScript this way. And what it will do is the output, Webpack will take the output into, and this library name is actually what you might consider like a namespace for your JavaScript. So what it will actually do is when your browser will load this file, it will recognize all of the components that we're putting together here underneath window.components component name. And so that's why back in our index, when we say we're referencing the HelloWorld component this way. So we're loading up the HelloWorld component function from React, and then we're using the React DOM to render that component in the element with the ID HW. Okay. So that's a great start. And do we have this? Okay, we have it watching the whole time. So now let's go and let's create a component that's a little bit more challenging, and let's show how to pass a message into it. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a HelloMessage component. So back in our front end /source components file, let's create one called HelloMessage. And structurally, it's going to be very similar to the HelloWorld component. We need to pull in React, and then function HelloMessage, and then this one will take in a parameter of message, and then it will return hey there message. So again, something really simple. We'll export default HelloMessage, and then back in our index.js, let's export default as HelloMessage from /components HelloMessage. Okay, it's pretty straightforward. We've got a component that when we when we declare it, when we want to run it, we need to pass in some text, and then it will come out. It will be rendered in the component as "Hey there," and then whatever the text is that we used. So back in our Java controller, in our home controller here, now let's make use of the Spring Framework model, and then let's actually make some text here. So let's model add attribute, and let's call it message, and then let's create a message. Hello from Spring Boot, or how about just Spring Boot? And then that will be passed to the front end. So then in our index.html page, we want to create HelloMessage is new components HelloMessage, and we need to pass in a message. So let's create a variable const ms or msg, and then what we need to do is make use of Spring or Thymeleaf, some special Thymeleaf syntax to inject what we've passed from the model from the controller into this page. So we need to surround it with comments, HTML comments, but the Thymeleaf processor will know what to do with this. So if we double open square brackets, and then we have the $sign message, and then we close everything up, and then and then close the comment, and then what JavaScript, or not JavaScript, what Thymeleaf will also let us do is it'll let us create a default. So this will be the default text. So if when Thymeleaf looks at this variable and tries to resolve it with the given data from the controller, if it's not there, then it'll just replace that with default name. So that's kind of how you know whether it worked or not. And then let's do the same thing here. So we're passing MSG into the HelloMessage constructor, and then let's use the React DOM to render HelloMessage into document get element by ID, and then let's call it HM, and then let's create a new div here called HM. Awesome. Okay, so let's go ahead and start that up. So now we get the component saying, "Hey there, Spring Boot." So we've gotten the message back from our controller. Let's go back to our controller, Spring Boot controller, which is under message, and then we've passed that into our HelloMessage component, which then renders it on the index.html page. Okay, so far so good. We've got two components rendering, one that we've given a parameter. So now let's look at one that just displays a list for us, and I'm going to call it HelloList. And all it's going to do is take the data that we give it and then render it as a nice UL element list in HTML. So this is another common thing of working with data from any server, is just working with the list that comes back. So in our components folder again, let's create a new JavaScript file called HelloList. And then very similarly to the other components that we've just made, we import React from React. We call our function HelloList, and what we want to do is we want to create a map of the item of the items in our list. We want to create li elements for each one, and then what we want to return is we need an empty React. Empty this. You know what? I'll finish the component first. Here's some data, and then let's do UL, and then render our items, and then export default HelloList. So all we're doing here is, if you haven't seen too much React code before, is that sometimes when we have a component with multiple elements within it, we have to surround it with a basically a component on its own. It's no different than if we wrap these with a div, some kind of div element. So we can use what I like to do in my React components is just return an empty element. which used to be called React Fragments, but since then, I think, well, maybe they're still called React Fragments, but the syntax is just a open and close angled brackets. Okay, so we've returned HelloList. Let's go back into our index.js and let's export it. From components / HelloList. That all looks fine and dandy. Let's go back in here and we now see that it's been built. Let's stop our server there. Okay, and then let's go back into our index.html. Oh, first in our controller, let's return a list. Okay, so let's build a new array list of strings and let's call them ships. You can call it cars, whatever kind of data you want to work with, or whatever kind of example you want to work with, sorry. So I'm going to be looking at star destroyers. So ships.add adjudicator. Let's see, we've also got the Avenger. Ships.add the bellicose. Any string data, okay, the courageous. And of course, the intrepid. So we've got some Star Destroyer names coming back, and then we just need to attach them to our model. So add attribute, oops, if I can spell right, add attribute. We'll just call them data, and then ships is the object that we're passing back. Okay, so now we've got our model containing both a message and data. So back in our index.html, let's create a new empty div and we'll call it HL for HelloList. And then in our JavaScript code here, let's go through and create that HelloList component. First we'll load in the ships. So again, we make use of that /* and then square brackets, and then we called it data, and then we close everything off. You end the comment, and then by default we'll just use an empty array. So if it's not getting any data, and let's even console log that out. Ships. Okay, and then const HelloList equals new components HelloList, and we'll give it the ships array, and then we'll render that with React DOM into document get element by ID HL. All right, that all looks good. Let's make sure that built. Okay, let's restart our Spring Boot server and then reload our index.html. And we get our Star Destroyer names. Hooray for our demo here. So we've got 3 components here now. So we've got our HelloWorld component, we've got our HelloMessage component, and then our HelloList component, which are all 3 common types of components that you might use for enhancing your page that you're working with. So that's about it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed what we went through today. I think it was a pretty cool experiment. I wish I had a lab coat kind of costume. I think it would fit for this kind of video perfectly. As I said before in the intro, I've seen 3 different kinds of JavaScript projects. Most common is creating a single page application or a SPA and injecting that into a HTML page rendered by the server. But in this case, we tried something a little bit different where we created a small component library that we then just made use of in a regular Thymeleaf index page. I had a lot of fun. If you like this video, please give it a like, subscribe to the channel for more, and leave a note in the comments what you want to see in the future. Have a good day, everyone. Peace.